scheme. Okay. Yeah, recording progress. Yeah, okay. The two new pension schemes soon spread across China, and the numbers of recipients was growing quickly at the early stage from 16 million in 2009 to 131 million in 2012, and steadily increased to 161 million in 2020. Given the rapid growth in pension coverage, a question was raised: how Chinese families react to public pensions, whether public pensions displace intergenerational private transfers. One of the frequently referred theories that explain or predict the response of family support is the crowding out theory. It claims that the behavior of providing family support is based on altruism motives. For example, in the case of intergenerational private transfers, the support from adult children to their old parents is based on the fact that the utility or the well-being of the old parent is based on the well-being of the adult child is partly dependent on
sorry to interrupt. Sorry to interrupt, Jiaxin LIU. Some of delegates said they can't listen your voice very clearly. Can you, yeah. So you can pick your mic more close to.
Is that bad? Is that better?
Yeah, much better, much better.
Much better.
Right.
Okay. Okay. No problem. Sorry about that. Okay, so the altruism motive, yeah. Okay, I will continue talking about the altruism motive. So basically the idea is that the adult children providing for their parents is because that they care about their old parents, and the well-being or the utility of the adult child is partly dependent on the well-being of their parents. Therefore, if public transfers to old people increase their utility as good as private transfers, then private transfers will be crowded out. And contrasted to altruism motive, Cox argues that private support can also be driven by the exchange motive. Old parents would be financially empowered by public transfers. Therefore, in order to obtain goods and service, adult children need to provide more monetary support. In this sense, public transfers may not crowd out private transfers, but instead crowding in private transfers. Earlier evidence indicate that crowding out effect of public pensions might not be important for developed countries, but for developing countries. Cox and his colleagues later suggest that developed countries might be the wrong place to investigate the crowding out effect. Instead, they suggest focusing on developing countries where the public transfers are relatively small, so that responsive transfers can be better detected. Moreover, some empirical studies have also shown that the crowding out effect only exists among families at low or lower to moderate income levels, which remind us to rethink the redistributive effects of public pensions. Conversely, a series of comparative studies have identified the crowding in effect of public pensions, especially in European countries. The results show that a higher level of public formal support is associated with more family support. These studies have challenged the dichotomy in support motives and brought in the institutional and contextual factors to the understanding of the potential interplay between public and private transfers. The discussion on welfare state and family solidarity, for instance, suggests that public transfers to older people may reduce potential conflicts over financial resources between the two generations, and therefore create a new form of reciprocity. Moreover, the impact of social norm on family support behaviors and the cultural meanings and the symbolic values of private transfers are certainly different in familistic welfare regimes. In this sense, I developed my research aim, which is to examine the potential interactions between public pensions and intergenerational private transfers in China. The dataset I used in this study is China Health and Retirement Longitudinal Study, and it's a large-scale national representative panel dataset, which includes rich information on older people and their families. Respondents aged below 60 at the time of the survey were removed from the samples. Old people in this study are not only seen as recipients, but also as providers of private transfers. Therefore, both upward child-to-parent private transfers and downward parent-to-child private transfers were measured. Besides, to better capture the potential impact of public pensions, both incidence and amount of private transfers were measured. Therefore, there are 4 dependent variables that were developed for estimation. Public pension incomes and the specific pension schemes are the 2 explanatory variables to examine the impact. Hukou type is used as a moderator variable to examine whether the potential interactions are the same among urban hukou holders and rural hukou holders. Informed by previous literature, there is also a set of control variables, including the demographics of both generations, as well as their relationships such as geographic proximity and the frequency of contact. And the Heckman two-step selection model for panel data was used to estimate the interactions between public transfers and private transfers. There are 2 reasons. The first reason is to reduce potential selection bias. If there is a systematic difference between older people who did receive private transfers and those who did not, then the estimation based on those who did receive the transfers would be inaccurate. Heckman two-step selection models take that into consideration and adjust the equation accordingly. The second reason, as I just mentioned, is to explore the impact of public pensions at both intensive margin, which refers to the change in amount of private transfers, and also the extensive margin, which refers to the change in the incidence of private transfers. First, let's have a quick look at the descriptive results. Overall, old people received more private transfers than they provided. As shown in Table 1, more than 70% old people received private transfers from their adult children, where only 30% provided such support downwards. And in Table 2, the mean value of the log transfers received was higher than they provided. By public pension schemes, the incidence of upward private transfers was highest among recipients of the new pensions. The incidence of downward private transfers was highest among recipients of the long-established 2 pension schemes. Moreover, recipients of the long-established 2 pension schemes also received or provided more private transfers than their counterparts. Next is the result from regression analysis. This table shows the impact of public pension on upward private transfers received by old people. Model 1 used different pension schemes as the explanatory variable, and Model 2 used log pension incomes. In each model, the selection equation estimates the probability of receiving upward private transfers, and the adjusted equation estimate the log amount of transfers after the correction of sample selection issue. From the selection equation in Module 2, we can say that in general, the probability of receiving private transfers decreased with pension incomes. Specifically, for example, holding other variables constant, a 20% increase in pension incomes would reduce the probability of receiving upward private transfers by 0.01 in its Z-score. But if we look across public pension schemes, we can find out that such crowding out effect was only statistically significant among recipients of enterprise employee basic pensions. The probability was decreased by almost 0.3 in its Z-score. The new pensions, however, actually increase the probability of receiving private transfers. What's more, the new pensions for rural residents also crowding in 12% more private transfers, where for urban recipients of the new pensions, the amount of private transfers was 8% lower than urban older people who had no public pension scheme, public pension benefits. As for downward private transfers provided by older people to their adult children, there's a clear crowding in effect. In general, the higher pension incomes are, the more likely the old people provide financial support to their adult children, and the amount is also slightly higher. But similarly, if we look across pension schemes, we can say that such crowding in effect only exists among recipients of enterprise employees' basic pensions. Coefficients for the interaction terms between public pensions and the hukou type are statistically insignificant, indicating that there is no urban-rural difference in the crowding in effect. And let's have a quick look at other social demographic characteristics. An urban hukou holder were less likely to receive upward private transfers, but more likely to provide downward transfers. Women are more likely to receive private transfers, and when they did, they received more. Both upward and downward private transfers were less frequent or fewer in amount for widowed, separated, or divorced elderly people. Older people in developed provinces received the most upward private transfers, but their peers in less developed areas were more likely to provide downward private transfers. Old people with moderate incomes were more likely to receive upward private transfers, but the probability of providing downward private transfers increased significantly with old people's income. Both upward and downward private transfers increase with the incomes of adult children. Adult children being married increase both probability and amount of providing upward private transfers, but decrease the amount of downward transfers from old parents. Geographic distance, instead of reducing private transfers, increased both upward and downward transfers. Finally, the implications of the results. The study shows a coexistence of crowding out and crowding in effects of public pensions, which indicates the coexistence of different support motives between generations. It is therefore important to have a further understanding of the situations and the context under which families react differently. The fact that downward private transfers were crowded in by public pensions indicate that public pensions are at least partly channeled back to the younger generation by intra-family support network. The new pensions didn't reduce the incidence of upward private transfers. Instead, it brought about more family support. It could be explained by the low level of new pension benefits, which requires continuous family support as a supplementary source to secure old age. It could also be explained by, for example, the enhanced family solidarity, the symbolic meanings that private transfers carried with them, or the social and cultural norms in old age support arrangements in the Chinese society. Women received more transfers might indicate that the inequality in wealth accumulation from the market caused by, for example, the gender access to formal labor participation is somewhat compensated by private transfers. Or in other cases, it could also be associated with a gender role in intra-family redistribution or care and instrumental support. Last is the regional difference and the positive impact of geographic distance on private transfers. It on one hand shows the spatial disparity in socioeconomic development. On the other hand, partly because of that, many working age population are migrating to developed areas for better wage incomes, which is not only changing the society, but also reshaping the intergenerational relationships within the Chinese families. That's all for my presentation. Thank you very much. Any comments and suggestions, questions, I appreciate it. Thank you.
Thank you very much. You just keep the time right. So thank you for that. And firstly, we can quickly ask some comments and questions from our second presenter, Xinmei Wang. Can you?
Yes, I have some short one because I never used the Heckman's model. Just based on the evidence of China's pension system, I totally agree your conclusion because the rural pension system, they received much low pension benefits. The elderly in rural pension, they have to rely on their elder children. So that's why in these types of family, there's crowd in the results. And the crowding out, that one, because the public pension should be considered as a replacement rate, as a replacement of private support. That's why a country needs to set up a public pension. For this purpose, the urban system, for urban pension system, they had finished this function very well. So, and maybe extraordinary well, because the urban pensioners receive much generous pension benefits. So they have spare capacity, can support their children when these children do not have a good salary, good income. I didn't find one question is I didn't find the income. Do you employ the income variable for each individual? Do you control that effect? Yeah, that's one question for me, because it depends. If the elderly have too generous pension benefits, then they have capacity to support the children. If the children have a lot of income, wages or other earnings, then they have capacity to support the elderly. It doesn't, all this is not, it's closely related to the hukou, your registration status, but not so totally connect. So I think the income level, the wages or other earnings, you should control these variables. Yes, that's all.
Right, you can answer the question. Genie?
Yeah, can I just have a quick answer?
Put your mic close to your.
Okay. Okay, sure. Okay. Yeah. Okay. And thank you. Thank you, Xinmei. And yes, I did control the incomes for both older generations and the adult children. So basically, from the outcomes, the older people who have more incomes are more likely to provide downward transfers, and they are slightly less likely to receive. Old people at the highest income quarter are slightly less likely to receive upward transfers, and the probability and amount of private transfers, both downward and upward, increase with the incomes of the adult children. So I think it's somewhat reflect that the exchange or the support between generations is not entirely based on their need, but more carries like symbolic values and have more cultural meanings on that.
Yes, thank you.
Right. So, and we have two more questions. I can see Professor Ku turn on his video first, so I want to give the first chance, the second chance of question to Professor Ku. Can you?
Yeah, basically, I enjoyed your presentation, but I just want one curiosity or one question. You used the Heckman model for correcting selection bias, but I'm not sure that approach is appropriate for your research because you are examining the effect of public pension income or public pension receipt on private income transfer. So you are basically very interested in the effect of public transfer income, but you need to exclude some endogenous part of the variable, right? Then probably you can use instrumental variable such as a two-stage least scale method, not selection bias method. You know, if you, for example, when you estimate, when you are trying to predict public pension income, but you just need to remove selection bias, then you can use Heckman selection model, I guess. But in this case, probably instrumental variable approach is more appropriate. That's just my guess. So,
Right, it's more like comments. So, Zhan Liu, can you respond to that?
Yeah, thank you very much. Yes, that is actually a question that spend some time that I need to think about.
Take your mic to your mouth, please.
Sorry. Yeah. Thank you for the questions. And yes, I did think about that questions because from previous literature, I saw that scholars have used a different method to estimate the impact, including, as you mentioned, the AV approach, instrumental variables, and also the difference in difference, or even difference in differences. But also I've seen scholars using Heckman two steps to estimate the interaction. And the primary reason, as you mentioned, and which requires more discussion, is the selection bias. But also it is another important reason is that I want to examine both incidence and the amount of transfers, and this model incorporates both aspects. So I've ended up with this model. But yes, I will refer to more literature and to explore the fitness or the whether this model is the best to estimate the impact. But thank you for your suggestions.
Right, and Professor Youngjun Che, can you?
Yeah, probably the time is nearly up. So, but thank you so much for your presentation. Very interesting. And if you want to examine, just probably question or comments, but I haven't read your paper, so you might include everything there. But if you want to examine the exchange hypothesis, then I think the asset is a very important the variable, because the parents have an asset, and then the children give the cash to the parents. So the exchange is not really about the cash to cash; it's more like cash to asset relationship. So I think it's quite important to think about how to include the asset in order to examine the exchange model. And the other one is when the European people, they examine the formal the family support. When you mentioned about the more family support in European countries, sometimes it's not really about the cash, it's more about the care and visit. So if you want to examine the altruistic hypothesis, probably it's not really the cash to cash, it's more like cash to service from the children. So it's probably the data is limited, so you cannot do with this data. But somehow, if you want to kind of it really depends on the purpose of your research. Where your research is purely about the cash-to-cash kind of a crowding out and crowding in, but then it's okay. But if you want to look at the family relationship because of the public pension, then I think you need to take into account the asset element and the service element or the care element.
And yes,
All
thank
right.
you very much. Sorry. Yeah, great. Thank you very much. Yes, and about the assets, yes, I will look into that. And I'm totally agree with the different forms of support between family members. And actually, this study, the initial plan was to include both care support and financial support. And I also did use a variable called grandparental child care, the hours the old people spend taking care of their grandchildren. But the results show that public pensions didn't affect that pattern. So basically, it could be affected by other factors such as age or the number of children or their gender or maybe geographic proximity, such as as that. I also want to examine whether the care support received by old people would be affected by pension incomes. But as you said, the data doesn't have this variable and doesn't have this information. So limited by the data sets, I cannot do that. But I think that's really important. And actually, I also did some qualitative study on the intergenerational relationship and the impact of public pension on that. And they did mention the care and other forms of support like visits and contact. So I think you're absolutely right. And for the investigation should be required to have a fully understanding of this relationship. Thank you very much.
Right. It's time we move to the other presenters, but can you address the quick question from Kagakan Degger on the chat? He asking about how you account for geographical distance, whether the data have the variables in it.
Yes, the geographic distance and the respondent in the questionnaire asked where did your children live, whether they are in the same community or in the same city or in the same province or in other province. So I use that as a categorical variable and calculate the ratio of children living in a certain geographic distance to the total number of adult children. And
all right, thank you very much. Shall we? All right. So shall we move to second and third presenters? Because I suppose these two papers connected to each other, so we can have two presentation in row, and then we start the discussion for the second and third papers. It will be okay?
Yes, yes,
May
good arrangement. Thank you.
All right, so you can start your presentation now.
Yes. Just wait. Sorry, I right here. But the screen disappeared. I don't know. Yeah, then I share my screen.
All right.
Yeah. Okay.
Yeah.
Yeah. Thank you for having me here. I'm Xinmei Wang from Zhejiang University. This is our joint work with Professor Peng and Professor Zhan Peng. My topic is how the parameters underlying China's present public pension system are creating a high Gini coefficient among the present elderly in China. We use some data and also we got to confirm the facts. So first I introduce the structure, then we come to see the inequality situation. Then we investigate what factors behind them. So current problem in China, the pension system. The first big problem is the public pension benefit. It should be progressive. That's the common sense in all over the world. But in China, it's just the opposite. Public pension policy in China are regressive and plays a role of deepen income inequality. The Gini coefficient of public pension is very high and persistent. The second big problem is the earnings-related pension. It's urban pension, mainly urban pension. It should be self-financing. That's the common sense in modern pension design. But in China, it's different. Government have to pay great amount of subsidies to the EP system. And this pressure is persistent too. So what's the reason? Finally, we find because all the design are based on the incorrect economic average wage. That's the one key reason behind this evidence. So the data we use the CHIPS data, and last year just got published the official data. That's Ministry of Finance, the balance sheet of public pensions. So first we see the structure and design of China's public pension schemes. Currently we have two schemes. One is earnings-related pension. We call it EP. It started in 1950s. The next one is social pension. It covers the people not participating in an EP schemes. Oh, sorry. I don't know what happened, but the screen, yeah, okay. Based on the World Bank's multi-pillar model, based on this definition of each pillar, then we see how China's current public pension system is structured. So we have 0 pillar. It is a social pension. The benefit is flat rate, fully financed by tax, this one. And also for social pensions contributors, they have to contribute to the FDC. This is called second pillar. And the social pension consists of majority of the total participants. And then we have EP pension, earning-related pension. It covers private sector, urban private sector, and public sector employees and pensioners. And still, in 2018, we still have 16% of population uncovered. So still, coverage is an issue for China. So this is the changes of coverage. In the past time, or coverage, we only have EP pension. The participants there is mainly the formal sector employees and retirees. But currently, we have great amount of participants from informal sector. But all the rules, all the design, all the parameters still based on the situation of formal sector. That's the problem. So we see a little bit situation on the inequality situation. The government transfer mainly goes to the private sector, EP private sector and EP public sector. For the pensioners in these two systems, per pensioners, they receive very high subsidies from government transfer, but social pension receive much lower. And for public pension, their total pension benefits, about 1/3 of pension benefits comes from government transfer. So as a result, the average effective retirement age for EP, for urban sector, is much lower than the social pension participants, because they have to work more years. Their pension benefits is extremely low. Because the biased subsidy policy and the design, so we see the workers' wages and business income gap in China is only quite low, just this much, but their public pension benefit gap is extremely high, much higher than Japan. Actually, in Japan, in this year, there's jealous for public sector's employee. The public feel the public sector employee, they received too high benefits. Even in this situation, the benefit gap is 1.3, but in China, it's much higher. And so the benefit gap is much higher than the wage and business income gap, earnings gap. Why it can happen? We compare the Japan and China situation. The old age dependency ratio, Japan over China is 3.2, but the transfer is 3. It means Japan spend less transfer, relative transfer to public pension. But all these transfers in Japan was used to pay the benefit of social pension, not earning-related pension. That's why Japan can be more equal, much more equal than China. This is a Gini decomposition. We see the public pension, the Gini coefficient of public pension is higher than market incomes. And public pension contribute most of inequality of the total income of the elderly. So this one, we see the dotted line is the concentration ratio curve of public pension benefits, and the real line, this blue line, is the Lawrence curve for the total income. The dotted line under the Lawrence curve, it means public pension plays the role of deeper income inequality. But in developed countries, Sweden and Japan, it's no role the income inequality. So it is the reason why China's Gini coefficient of total income of the elderly can be the highest among this group. So we see this. Yeah. Let's see what happened And this table, we see why this can happen, because up to date, we see the benefit level of public pension for the urban sector. We compared all the benefit level relative to the formal sector average wages. Then if we without transfer, it can be much low. And with government transfer, it can receive a little bit better. Actually, when we see the average of EP, include both private and public, the EP is about 40%. And scholars, pension experts, they think the benefit level relatively too low. Quite we should collecting more money to pay the pension benefits. But if because they use the formal sector average wages. But if you use the economy average wage, here I only include middle and small firms, but actually we have other half the employees in the informal sector that they are in the tiny enterprises or self-employed. We don't have this data. We don't have data for informal T for these groups of people. We only include these two. Then we see the relative pension level is much higher. For the public sector, it can reach more than 100. And even for the private sector, it's in a quite good level. This level compared to the international norm, it's a quite good level. It's not low.
Sorry to interrupt, but can you finalize your presentation in 2 minutes, please?
Okay, thank you. And because we, the other issue is about the too high contribution flow. For the EP pension, the flow is equal to the 60% of average EP wages. So it's much higher than the social pension, the working population. It's much higher. You see the blue number is much higher than this red numbers. So that's why the migrants refuse to join the EP pension. Also, we have other factors. Another factor is the faulty annuity factor. It causes the very high replacement rate for the EP pension. So the conclusion, the key factors creating a too high Gini coefficient for China's public pension benefits are several EP pension scheme design deficiency, that the high budget subsidies to pay the inflated EP pension promises at the expense of adequate social pension for those who don't qualify for an EP pensions. And the use of EP average wage to construct the earnings flow for EP scheme participation, which is too high to enable the participation of the half of the population covered by an inadequate low social pension. In sum, because of EP design deficiencies, the deficiencies, the government is continuously transferring budget money to uphold EP promises, while at the same time, low and low middle income workers are excluded from the EP participation. That's all. Thank you.
Thank you very much. And we can move to the third presenter. So Peng Zhan would suggest the much fairer and sustainable pension system in China. That's right. So you can start your presentation right now.
Okay, thank you very much. Can you hear me now? Yeah. Yes. It's okay. Okay. My presentation is a joint work with Professor Palmer, Professor Wang Xinmei, and Professor Wang Guangzhou. The title is creating an intergenerationally fair and financially sustainable universal pension system for China. We did the main work of this paper, current work. It did a simulation, a very simple simulation to see if the current pension system is maintained over time. What will the future security system look like? So this is a trend of the proportion of old people aged 65 over. You see, the proportion of the elderly in China is increased very much in recent 30 years. Continue to 2060 almost, and the speed is very high compared to other countries. So this is why we focus on this problem. In our model, the model setting, the model is very simple. We have the first model is demographic variables, the total population and age, gender, population structure come from the Yeungnam projections. And the model focuses on two populations, working age population and the pension age population. The workers is equal to the worker age people multiplied by working participation rate and the pension and something like this. And then the economic variable is come from China household project income project data, CHIP 2018 data. We calculated the labor participation rate of working age people, and we calculate the average pension benefit, pension contribution, something like this. And then Professor Wang just presented our joint paper, Introduced China Pension System. So in this paper, we simulate a long-term development of adequacy and sustainability of the pension system from the present to the year 2100. So the first, for the pension system, we have two very important variables, two groups of variables. The first one, the working age segment of the population in 2018. We need to use the contribution rate is equal to the average contribution rate of all insured working age people calculated by CHIP data. And then we calculate the total contributions is equal to wage, contribution rate, and the number of insured working age. So the wage by different ages and contribution rate, the number of insured working age people that will be impacted the total contribution in the model. And the second group is the benefits of the pension age population in 2018. The benefit is equal to average benefit of all pensioners is calculated observed by the household data. It's not calculated by the equation. It's not calculated by the theoretical equation. So and then the total benefit is equal to the benefit multiplied by the number of pensioners. So like this. And then this is the labor participation rate. Just take a look. Okay, so we can in urban area we can see the retirement age have a huge impact on the labor participation rate for male. For male, and for a very huge impact on female. So this is the data. And then this is the average wage each age in 2018. And then the red line, the blue line, and the other line is the population, the age distribution in different years. So we can see the age distribution of population is changed in recent 50 years. This change will have some impact on the total contribution. So the blue line is the population in 2050. So like this. Okay, this is background. And then this is the pension coverage by age and gender in 2018. We need to know that because of the in China pension system, there is a minimum contribution years is 15. But sometimes the working years is larger than the minimum pension contribution year. So we can see the red line is the insured people in each age, but the green line is the contributors. The proportion of contributor is less than the insured people. So we need to know the background of this. So, and then, yes, okay. Then, okay, we have two scenarios. One is a pure DC model. The benefit is determined by contributing based on a fixed contribution rate. This is a pay-as-you-go system. So in each year, we receive the contribution, the total contribution from the working age people, and then use this pension fund in pensioner for the pensioners at the same year. So something like this. So the setting of scenarios, this is the average wage rate will rise and the proportion structure will change, and the contribution rate remain unchanged. So this because we determine it by contribution, and the pension coverage benefit contribution remain unchanged, and the ratio between government subsidy and the total distribution remains unchanged. Something like that. The benefits are calculated on the basis of the average of pension and the number of all elderly people. And scenario DB is a pure DB. The contribution is determined by the benefit. The average benefit is increased at the same rate as the earnings. Something like this. So this is two scenarios. And then if we fix the labor participation rate and the pension coverage is same to the values in 2018. So then this is the number of laborers and the number of pensioners. We can see the number of laborers is increased from about 1950 to almost now. The number of laborers is increasing for many long times. But after 2020, from now on, the number of laborers were decreasing very fast. But the number of pensioners is keep increasing in a very high speed in the next 30 years until 2050. So, okay, this is the background. Then this is the ratio of pensioner, the number of pensioners to the number of laborers. So in recent 30 years, a very huge impact by the change of the macroeconomic structure. Okay. Then from the model, we get the ratio of per capita pension, ratio of per capita pension benefit to per capita earnings. So this is a replacement rate. And if it's DB, if the pension benefit is changed, the growth rate of pension benefit is same to the earnings, the ratio will be almost one. But if we DC model, the replace rate will be decreased very much. And in the year of 2050, it's almost 20%. It's very low. It's very low. And then if we use the DB model, the contribution rate for the working aged people will be very high in the next 30 years, especially at in the years of 2050, the contribution rate will be higher than 100%. It's impossible to do it like this. So the real Chinese pension system is a combination of the NBD and causal vision of NDC. It's a combined of this, but in China's NDC is not a good NDC is like some important features like this. The present Chinese value NDC is not better. And we find that neither Chinese MDB nor Chinese NDC are financially sustainable in the future, and that the adequacy of NDC will be weak after 2030, which is attributable to the absence of the proper NDC indexing of accounts and other Chinese data divisions. So in this paper, we just conclude that the state core is neither adequacy nor financial sustainability. In the continuing work, in the future, we're just doing this of our project. We will examine what a properly designed, no financial designed contribution design for all of China can contribute to attaining long-term adequacy and financial sustainability, and how it works in the practice, giving scenarios for especially the unknown future demographic of China. So in our mind, the present NDB social pension would transform into a tax-financed minimum defined benefit pension grantee. Follow the example of Sweden, Norway, and Chile, something like this. The grantee minimum pension benefit could be one of the three scenarios. For example, the mean test against the public earning related NDC and the FDC pensions, and indexed with the ratio of growth of the national average wage, and perhaps further differentially based on the geographic minimum living standard, something like this. So this is what I think about. We will check this in the future model. In the further modeling, we will do 3 works. The first one, you will consider the pension age and change the pension age of women to 60 and increase the pension age for both men and women with the development of life expectancy. And second work is study the efficiency of the NDC in dealing with the future scenarios regarding the growth of the working age population and the labor population rate. And the third one is development and evaluation of alternative benefit calculation equations. We will consider how to consider the annuity factors. It's, in China now, the annuity factor is fixed as 169 months. It's fixed. We'll consider how to change this. So this will we will be work. So because of the time limitation, which I just presented something like this. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much. So shall we start with the discussion from Jiaxin LIU? Any comments and questions? So you can turn on your mic and put your mic.
Yeah, sorry about that. Thank you, and Xinmei, thank you very much. The presentation contains many information, and the data seems quite interesting. And I think the main point or the main questions that you want to answer is what drives the inequality in China's public pension incomes. And I think there are a lot of information for me to digest. So I don't know if I will ask some stupid questions, but from the start, so the paper focuses on the earning-related pension schemes, which is jointly funded by employees, employers, and the state. One of the recurring theses that you've mentioned a lot is that government has transferred too much to the earning-related pension schemes for public sector. To quote your paper, 34% of their pension benefits comes from government transfers, where for those in private sector, only 70% of their pension benefits comes from government transfers. So here is my first question. Government transfer contribution is as high as nearly 1/3 of their pension incomes for public sector employees. To what extent could it be explained by government contributing as the employer of the employees in public sector. What I mean is that compared to employees in private sector, where the employers would contribute 20% in the Chinese case, but in public sector, the employers would be the government themselves. And the second question is about regional difference. As earning-related public pensions have yet to be funded or paid at the national level, which in Chinese means 尚未实现全国统筹. Therefore, the decision of contribution base is down to local government, and the public transfers from the central government was largely used to ensure that local government can pay the pension benefit to residents. So to what extent the paper takes that into consideration? So that would be all my question. Thank you very much.
Thank you.
Yes, very good questions. And I can know from your question, you understand Chinese pension very deeply. The first question, the subsidy, here's the subsidy to the public sector. That's the pure subsidy, not the employer's contribution. Employer's contribution already in the balance sheet, the contribution already in the contribution rows. And I calculate the total contribution rate for public sector. It already reached 29%, almost 29% of average wage of public sector. So it means the employer's contribution, that's from general revenue, but for the public sector employees, it's from the general revenue, but different characteristics. The employer's contribution, that's the country as a employer, they employed the public sector employee. So that's the equal to the employer's contribution. So the government already paid that there. In addition, they expand still around 34% of subsidy to the public sector. That's the pure subsidy, not the employer's contribution. For the pooling issue, yes, the private sectors, the pooling level for the private sector's EP, that's on the provincial level. So this is the main reason cause the government have to pay the subsidy. But half of the total subsidy, if we say the government total subsidy, half has paid to the public sector. The public sector has nothing to do with pooling level. That's totally financed by the government general revenue. So it has nothing to do with the pooling level. So even you get the pooling level reach to the national level, still you have to solve the problem of too high benefit of public sector employee. You still face great pressure there. So after the pooling level reached to the national level, the subsidy to the EP private sector could be greatly reduced, but still quite amount of them remain there, needed government support. That's all. Yes, Professor Palmer want to explain more.
You can unmute your mic first, Edward Palmer, please. Turn on your mic, please.
Trying.
All right. Yeah. We can listen. Oh no.
Can you hear me now?
Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah. Right.
Yeah. Well, thank you for unmuting me. I think that for me, when I learned about this, I think that the problem is in a sense, very simple to resolve because it's just a calculation error that's only been going on for about 20 years, if not more. But this is okay. What Xinmei has said is, of course, a background to what's happening, and it explains that the subsidies are all going to the persons who have already the highest pensions and the highest income. And that, of course, if you're interested in equality and Gini coefficients, you can understand that's the cause of the lopsided coefficient for pensioners or the elderly. But the next question is, why is there such a big deficit in the enterprise, especially the enterprise? I think we should forget about the public employees, because in every country they seem to take a special status, and they're not a lot of people. There are many people, but the enterprise employees would constitute a better example. And that example, when the pensions are calculated, it's just dividing by something called an annuity factor, and something called the annuity factor is driven by a projection of the longevity of the persons receiving the benefits. So that sounds pretty simple. And when you look at the factor which is being used in China, which was established, if we understand correctly, and established, well, we know it was established in 2005, and we believe that it has not been changed since then. At that time, according to the factor, people were expected to live 4 years after the pension age. And I think everybody in this panel probably understands that pensioners, people who become pensioners today, especially women at the age of 55, live more than, on average, 4 years. In fact, they'll probably live to the age of 75 or between 75 and 80, and some of them much more. So this factor has been used. It creates a deficit because people are getting extremely generous pensions, and in order to, which are not covered by the contributions. And in order to then finance this, the overgenerous pensions not covered by contributions, then of course the government has to have a big subsidy that goes to the enterprise pensioners, enterprise sector pensioners, which is, and that's just the way it works. And because of this, there's not a lot of money left, I would suppose, according to the government's way of looking at it, to support the social pension, which is actually what in most countries in the world is what the government budget is used to do, to tax subsidize social pensions to people for whatever reason cannot get a good pension by the time they turn the pension age, which in most countries, most developed countries is age 65, 67. And certainly not age 55. So the age 55 is also a subsidy, which is given to women in the enterprise system. And so it's this combination of not paying enough contributions because of the design of the schemes and the use of the design, which creates the deficit, which creates the need for the money to be transferred from the budget to the enterprise pension group. And you might, it's not, of course, in terms of equality, a good way to run a country system. And you would think that then it cannot continue to be this way. So that's the second paper shows that it doesn't matter whether you call it a DC or a DB, this way of doing things, because it's really not either a DC or a DB. It's just using the wrong design in order to go forward. Although people are contributing, which is good, but the relation between what you contribute and what you get is still not it's not correct. And so these things have to be changed. That's what we're going to, we can't do this on an individual level, but we can do it on a macroeconomic level and then introduce something like a real NDC scheme, which has the real projections for life expectancy and not these things that are in the in the law from 2005, which is just creating a big disturbance. And then also doing something about the pension age, which has to be done anyway, which I think the government's already thinking about, increasing it for women to 60 and then continuing to increase it in the future with the increase in life expectancy. So by doing that, and then the third thing we're going to do, which is of great interest, at least to me, because I work a lot with NDC pension schemes, is actually is doing the right sort of indexation, which China is not doing. So, and the right sort of indexation would give people pensions which keep track with wage increases so that the replacement rate would be adequate for all their lives. But in a country which is threatened by an extreme decline in the labor force, something has to be done about that, because there are not enough workers left to make all of that work as well as it would if you'd had a constant rate of workers to pensioners. So, and that means that there's NDC also indexes with respect to the change in the labor force, which is expected to be negative in China, which means that people they'll get a reduction in otherwise very good pensions as time goes on, but everybody will get the same reduction based on the demographics and the labor force as time goes on. So it's in a sense a fair reduction because everybody shares in it, not just one or two sectors in China. So that's what we're going to do. And we've got all of we've got the basic information now. Sorry, I talked too long.
Actually, it's time we finished, but we can address one quick question if you have any. And maybe I can ask some kind of political aspect of this kind of reform, because in rational thinking, as you see, this current system is not fair and nor sustainable. But if there is a big difference between different groups of people already, to make a fairer system, even though you said everyone have reduction in, fairly, but how we can deal with it in political processes can be different. So how you can think about that aspect?
I'm happy that you asked that question. So yes, and obviously you cannot just cut the pensions of current pensioners in order to make things work. So that you have to have a transition, and the transition recognizes because people have been told that they have a certain pension and they're pensioners now, and they're enterprise pensioners for the most part, and that then they should be entitled to receive that pension, but it gets phased out. And so on the other hand, the people who are currently working, their pension contributions will contribute to their own pensions in the future, the way we're going to do it. And so that it'll continue to be that way, but we'll get the design parameters done correctly so that the system remains both adequate and financially sustainable. But there has to be a transition. So we cannot just cut pensions for present pensioners. Nobody would ever do that. Any politician doing that would probably end up hanging in the local square. So
yeah.
So nobody wants to do that. So you have to have a procedure for doing it. And the good news for China that is the rate of economic growth is tremendous, even in the future compared to what most countries have. And so it'll be easy to deal with this in practice because China is producing a lot of income.
Right.
And so it should not be a problem. And so what the sort of calculations we do also are the most important thing is the macro result, which shows that what happens with the deficit over time. And maybe then the deficits that we show in the previous calculations for the current system, hopefully will not be there.
So Xinmei Wang, do you want to add something?
Yes, still we have another room because our retirement age is too low. we have great room there can improve the adequacy and sustainability problem.
No. And I think that an additional thing just shortly is that looking at the participation rates that Peng showed you, that it shows that there's even a lot of room there to increase participation among those who are already there, regardless, because it's not really full participation. And that also helps a lot in the future.
Right.
There.
The another room option is let more social pension participant switch to the EP pension. When government give a good protection of social pensions parents, the elderly social pension, then the young people would willing to join the EP pension and pay more contribution there.
Yeah, so then to lower the floor on participating in the EP to begin with for the SP people, which is only in total a half billion people, and lower that floor so it's possible for them to contribute into the system for their own pensions. And then as they become older and wealthier and incomes of everybody increases, then of course even they will have pensions based on their own income, which catches up with the enterprise workers' pensions in the long run. It might take a couple of two or three or four decades, but that's what we will be playing with in our calculations.
All right. Thank you very much. So it's really time we need to finish this session. And in 15 minutes, we will have second pension and old age session in 45 past. So you can join like this session. So thank you very much and have a good break now. Thank you.
Thank you.